From 1878 to 1968, there were 71 lake captains that called Bayview, Wisconsin, on the shore of Lake Michigan, their home. While they lived here, they captained 195 different ships, from tugboats to schooners to steamships, in voyages that took them to every one of the Great Lakes. Join us now for another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we explore not only these captains, but also their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we talk about the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin from 1878 to 1968 in the age of sail and steam. This episode, like all the others, is brought to you courtesy the Historic Bayview Lake Captains Society. Now I'm once again filming a sailing adventure here from my house, formerly the home of Johanna Brotch, Bayview's only female ship owner, and her husband Captain John Brotch, who captained the schooners that she owned. Except for this story, he captained a different one that he himself owned, but still in Bayview. At the time, he didn't live here at 515 East Lincoln. He lived down the hill at the corner of East Lincoln and Bay, where you saw the drone take off just now. He's captain and owner of the Elbe, and this story really gets to the pressure that the captains felt at the time. There were a lot of them. I mean, I've seen reporting where during the heyday of schooners, there were like 4,500 schooners on the lakes. Most of them mom and pop operations, meaning small businesses. And this was certainly the case here, that if you didn't take a cargo, there would be somebody right behind you ready to take it. And so he felt pressure to take the job. He had 6 children at home. And that meant, in this case, taking the job meant sailing out into the fog at dusk. Thick fog. Pea soup fog. He had a cargo to deliver, probably, don't know where, probably Port Washington, maybe Sheboygan, because of the path that he took. I don't want to spoil the story for you, it's coming up, but basically, once he left the pier, he couldn't even see the breakwater. All dead reckoning. Let's see, I'll sail this far for this long, you know, it'll take me about a mile or so out, and then I'll turn to port and I'll head on a northerly coast and hope I miss North Point. The curveball, of course, is the wind and the current. And if you can't see where you are, you might be okay, but if the wind and the current were blowing you this way, even if you compensated, was your compensation enough? Don't know. So he swagged it. It stands for silly, wild, something guess. Hey, it's a family-friendly channel. So he swagged it, and he didn't make it. But he was saved from hitting the rocks on North Point by the North Point Lighthouse, which at the time was staffed by Georgia Stebbins, Milwaukee's only female lighthouse keeper. So she basically saved his life. I'll leave it at that. It's a great story, true story. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, narrated by our professional and theater-trained narrator from England, Simon Stanhope, coming up next. And with that, I'll say, have a nice day, enjoy the beautiful weather, and hats off to our Bayview Lake captains. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Welcome to another installment of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we discuss the lives of the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in the age of sail and steam. This discussion will include their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes. Here is the map of lake captains' homes in Bayview, to show you where this episode takes place. Its location focuses primarily on the large green arrow. Today, we will be providing the true story of a sailing adventure by Bayview Lake Captain John Brotch that occurred in 1883, while he was living on the northwest corner of East Lincoln Avenue and Bay Street, then numbered 26 Lincoln Avenue, before 1930 and since torn down. In order to best tell the story, fictitious conversations are provided. However, these do not affect factualness of the story. This story, along with its sources, is taken from the book A Brother Helps His Sister, the true story of William A. Draves, the Schooner Arctic, and the house at 515 East Lincoln Avenue. We will now begin. Chapter 11. And so John Brotch happily took the schooner Elbe to sea for that sailing season of 1882. It had taken the rest of his savings to buy out Fred Manga, but now John was the Elbe's sole owner and captain, at age 26. By sailing around the lakes for 10 years with Manga, his mentor, John Brotch had gained enough experience to get to know all of the port directors and typical seasonal cargo locations. Essentially, being captain of an independently owned schooner like the Elbe also meant being a salesman. Brotch was always on the lookout for a cargo to carry, and most of the time that came from getting to know the people ashore involved in such contracts. While a lot of the larger cargo carried on the lakes was coordinated by businessmen in the cities, it was still common for the independent schooners to line up in a queue after dropping off a cargo to wait for another to load, especially the smaller ones like the Elbe. Unfortunately, That sailing season of 1882 was one of the worst on record to date. It wasn't his lack of experience. He'd gained plenty of that through years of crewing under Captain Fred Manga. It was just a bad business season overall, all of which he had no control over. A news article on the awful economic season and the impact it had on all shipping, that included forcing the schooner Elbe into early winter storage, appeared towards the end of the sailing season in the Green Bay Press Gazette on Wednesday, 25th October, 1882. Quote, "The present season will be remembered as the dullest in the history of Lake Marine. 3 causes have operated to bring this about, which may be briefly stated. First was the early opening of navigation. Second, the small amount of grain held in store for shipment, and the high prices corners placed upon it. And third, a greater amount of tonnage than was necessary to do the business. At Milwaukee on Tuesday, the barge met a comet, schooners Elbe and Ashtabula, and scow R.H. Becker were stripped and placed in winter quarters, all on account of the prevailing dullness." Unquote. Each sailing season usually ran until the first week of December, when insurance companies began to end coverage due to ice starting to form on the lakes. But because John Brotch had to close down early this 1882 season, he lost over a month of income. With wife Johanna and 3 young children to take care of at home, this financial loss meant it was going to be a long winter. When the next year's sailing season began, in April 1883, John Brotch had the Elbe ready to sail right away. He had to make up for income lost the previous season of 1882. As soon as the ice melted, he was away. He pushed hard and made additional sails at different ports. Steady income was flowing again, but it came at a price. John Brotch worked himself to the limit, taking cargoes in bad weather he might otherwise have refused if his finances were steady. So that season of 1883 he went out when the weather was bad, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. In early June 1883, it caught up with him when he sailed out of Milwaukee Harbor blindly into dense fog. Other captains that weren't facing the same degree of financial pressure Captain Brotch was may have turned down the cargo of slabs that late afternoon. Certainly John Brotch knew the danger of sailing out into the fog as much as the other captains, but it was a calculated risk, and he decided to take it. The ultimate destination for the cargo is unknown today, but it was likely up the coast north of Milwaukee, because that was his course of travel, possibly Port Washington or Sheboygan. The local destination aspect of it may have also helped John Brotch to justify and rationalize taking the job in his mind. Well, it's only local, and I know this coastline extremely well. And he certainly did. His plan was to leave the harbour, turn to starboard, right, and head east to sail out just a mile or so by his estimate, then turn to port, left, and head due north to stay clear of the shoreline, until, by his dead reckoning of his course and estimated speed, he would turn to port when opposite his destination to head back into the shore with his cargo. The weather at his destination was unknown when he departed Milwaukee. It was entirely possible there was no fog there. That may also have been something he was hoping for when he hired on to haul the cargo that summer evening. The unknown, as John Brotch knew perfectly well, was the current and the wind. These are unknown today from the news reports, but it is likely both were involved. The way it works is, even if he maintains his northern compass heading, a westerly current could move him sideways towards the shore, and he would never know it in this thick fog until it was too late. Wind direction and speed he would get a general idea about by observing the wind in his sails, but it wouldn't be exact. His calculations would be estimated, and even if he was off by a couple of knots and a few degrees of direction, that would be enough to be catastrophic. So, basically, with no visual references to the shore because of the fog, he would have no idea he was closing with the shoreline until he smashed onto the rocks. Other captains and crew watching from the pier thought he was a fool. John Brotch didn't care. He had a wife and 3 children to support, plus a new house he'd promised to build. Nothing was going to keep him from this cargo. Besides, he wasn't a rookie. He'd sailed through worse. He knew he could make it, and off he went. It was dusk. The fog was so bad in the fading light that he could barely make out the breakwater, less than a quarter mile from the pier. He made for the edge of that breakwater, and when he was directly abeam of it, at the harbour mouth, turned as planned, slightly to starboard, so that the compass marked due east. He maintained that course, then quickly disappeared into the fog. If there was another schooner or steamer in his path, he would never see it or hear it in time, so he wanted to stay out of the shipping lanes further out on the lake, and that meant keeping close to shore. With no weather satellites around back then, it wasn't like he could just get out his phone, which didn't exist yet then either, and see where the line of the weather front was. It might be cleared a few miles out into the lake, but then again it might not. Plus, having sailed often from Michigan to Milwaukee, it was also possible the weather was cleared on the Michigan side, and ship's captains over there would have no reason not to sail across, only to be surprised by the fog when getting closer to the Wisconsin side. So he likely felt it safer to be closer to shore and not get into a collision with ships coming across, or even down from northern Lake Michigan. He calculated his speed on that easterly course, and when he estimated he was far enough out into the lake to clear North Point, the point of land just north of Milwaukee that jutted out into Lake Michigan, he turned hard aport for a new course of due north. From now on, it was strictly a matter of dead reckoning, estimating the speed along a due north course line. After about 20 minutes, he figured he was approaching the North Point and the North Point Lighthouse. But was he going to successfully pass it by to port, or had that unknown current pushed him straight for it, doomed to crash on the rocks below? The beam from the lighthouse would tell him, but where was it in this fog tonight? He had to find it, to see it. He had to. Oh, if only that station had a foghorn to go with the light. At least then, if he couldn't see any of the light, he could at least get a general, though not nearly as good as the light, bearing from foghorn, and try to gauge his distance by the loudness of the horn. Unfortunately, the lighthouse wouldn't get a foghorn for another 42 years, in 1925, nor even get a fog bell until 1906, 23 years after the time of this story. John Brotch and his fellow captains all knew its keeper, Georgia Stebbins. In those days, everybody knew everybody. Milwaukee's captains all knew Georgia was always super diligent about keeping the light burning. They knew they could rely on her, trust her with their lives. The only female lightkeeper in the 127-year history of North Point Lighthouse, and also its longest-serving keeper. The North Point Lighthouse Museum today provides a great deal about her on its website. Here is most of it. Quote, in 1873, 27-year-old Georgia was living with her husband Lemuel, a jeweler and watchmaker, in New York City, when she was diagnosed with tuberculosis and given little time left to live. Her doctor said the only chance for survival was to leave the filth of the manufacturing metropolis for a habitat that had clean air to breathe. Lemuel stayed behind to work, and Georgia moved to Milwaukee to live with her parents at the North Point Lighthouse, where her father, Daniel Green, had recently been appointed keeper. When Georgia arrived at the northern end of Milwaukee Bay, a remote plot of rocky land, severed by deep ravines that dropped from the bluff to the lake below, she found both her mother and father in ill health. She immediately took on some of her dad's duties. No one knows whether it was the change of scenery, the climate, the air quality, or just a sense of commitment to her aging parents, but Georgia began to feel better. Her husband joined her several months later and opened a jewellery shop on East Mason Street. Within months, Georgia was taking care of virtually all the keeper duties. She spent her days maintaining the lighthouse, the keeper's quarters and the outbuildings, as well as the landscaping. She was required to write a log, from the goings-on around the keeper's quarters to the conditions of Lake Michigan, including weather and boat activity. Each evening at sunset, Georgia would climb 2 flights of steps and a final vertical ladder up the 28-foot tower, and later the 39-foot tower of the new lighthouse that opened in 1888, to the lantern room, where she would light the lamp. Every 4 hours after that, she would refill the lamp with mineral oil, trim the wick, adjust the air ventilation, clean the window if needed, and wind the clockwork that kept the massive 4th-order Fresnel lens rotating. Georgia's father retained his title as the Lighthouse Keeper for 7 more years, while his daughter performed the work. In July 1881, the U.S. Lighthouse Service deemed Georgia the official keeper of the North Point Lighthouse. She never spent a single night away from the lighthouse. Her son Albert and her 2 grandsons were born at North Point Lighthouse. Mrs. Stebbins would become the longest-serving lighthouse keeper in the rich history of the lighthouse, serving for 26 years, until she retired in 1907. Georgia passed away at the age of 74 on July 11, 1920, 1 month before women would receive the right to vote. Unquote. Captain Brotch stood at the Elb's helm, holding wheel steady on his north compass course, as he strained his eyes to port, left, to try to see that flash of Georgia Stebbins' North Point Lighthouse light through the fog, as he slowly, gingerly, and very carefully crawled his way up the Milwaukee shoreline. Just one ray, just one flicker of Georgia's light poking through this soup was all he would need to get a bearing to learn his position. Just one glimpse was all he needed. Just one. "Come on, Georgia," he said aloud. "Give me just one tiny ray. Just one little tiny ray for half a second. Come on, you can do it." Then it happened. He saw the light. Only for a second, and then he never saw it again. But it was enough. He got a bearing. Guessing from the strength of the light, and all he could do was guess, and the bearing, he found he was actually headed on a collision course with the rocks below, and was closer than he thought. The current and slight wind from the southeast was pushing him to port and closer to the shore, just as he had been concerned it might do when he set out. But with that bearing from Georgia's light, he was able to now compensate by turning 20 degrees to starboard on the compass to avoid the collision with North Point. He would now maintain this course with no worries until he could be assured he had passed North Point. After this turn to starboard, he praised Georgia Stebbins aloud, although he knew she couldn't hear him way up on the bluff. Actually, he cheered her with all his might, hollering and yelling, for keeping the light burning. "Thank you, Georgia," he hollered, as loud as he could. "I love you forever." But then, about 45 minutes later, everything went crash. He'd run up on the rocks at Whitefish Bay, just around the corner, and on the other side of North Point. Sure enough, the current, and probably a pick-up in the wind, had driven the little schooner Elb ashore. John Brotch never heard a sound until he hit the rocks. An analysis of the trajectory of his course departing Milwaukee and then successfully making it past North Point, and then veering round it to port, almost wrapping around it, and onto the rocks at Whitefish Bay on the other side, all but confirms he saw the light. Otherwise he would have run aground at North Point, not completely around it on the other side. Multiple news accounts followed soon after the grounding. Here is one from the Chicago Tribune, dated 10th June, 1883. Quote, "An old-timer run on the beach. Dateline, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The schooner Elbe, with a cargo of slabs, went ashore during the fog last night at Whitefish Bay. Her captain got ashore in a small boat and came here and procured a tug and the life-saving crew. After throwing overboard a part of her deck load, the tug worked on her about 4 hours and succeeded in releasing her. She was towed into the harbour, leaking badly, and it is thought that she is damaged considerably." Unquote. Other reports provide further details on the rescue efforts. John Brotch went for help, and also that the damage to the wooden hull hadn't been as serious as originally thought. The tugboat Co., home-ported in Milwaukee, came up to pull the Elbe off the rocks, then towed it back to Milwaukee. Luckily, a maintenance dry dock was open, and John Brotch had enough money to hire the ship repair company that managed it to perform repairs on the Elbe's hull. The damage wasn't as bad as it could have been, thanks to John Brotch keeping Elbe at a slow speed, and also thanks to a relatively calm sea. Still, there had been damage, and it did cost money to repair it. This was money he had not planned on using, but at least, luckily, he had enough to get the repairs done. It took about a week for the shipyard to plug the leaks on the Elbe from the grounding, and then John Brotch was able to get underway again. Because of the short duration of the repairs, none of the merchants that were shipping cargo at the various ports he normally called on had missed him, and he was back in business successfully again. He figured the damage could have been worse, and he only lost a week's wages, and, of course, the cost of the repairs. Had there been any waves of significance that night, the little Elbe would have been smashed to pieces by the waves. Waves hitting the rocks were essentially the same as tons of concrete. A ship afloat on the waves isn't affected, unless it's running head-on into them in a storm. But a ship stranded on the rocks, as tons of dead weight from the waves slammed down on it, has no chance, especially the wooden schooners of that era. So John Brotch was thankful and just kept going, focusing on still making 1883 the best sailing season for him yet. The accident hadn't quashed his determination. Thanks for watching. This photograph isn't about Bayview or its lake captains, but it's from the same era of Great Lakes maritime history. We thought we'd close with it for enjoyment, as it captures the spirit of the era. If you'd like to read more details about Captain John Brotch, as well as the sources for the information contained in today's video, you can find these and more in the book A Brother Helps His Sister, the true story of William A. Draves, the Schooner Arctic, and the house at 515 East Lincoln Avenue, for sale now by individual volumes in both ebook and paperback on both Amazon.com and HenschelHouseBooks.com. All proceeds from book sales go to support various maritime history projects related to Bayview's lake captains. One of these is a plaque and marker with the captains' names and addresses on it, as part of the creation of the Bayview Lake Captains Historic District, which will be the first of its kind in America. If you would like to contribute to support these projects, to include this and other markers honouring Bayview's lake captains, with 100% of all donations and contributions in all forms going to support them, please consider contributing to us through the listings found on our website under the Contribute button, as well as in the end credits at the conclusion of this video. Note, we are not a 501c3, so contributions are not tax-deductible. If, for some reason, we are unable to secure these markers, then all funds donated to this site will be given as a cash donation to the museum ship SS City of Milwaukee in Manistee, Michigan. This is the only surviving intact ship that was once captained by a Bayview Lake captain, and in its case was captained by at least 2, and likely 3, totaling over 20 years between them. Finally, we also have free self-guided walking tours of Bayview's 71 lake captains' homes, using only your phone. It's simple and easy. Just go to our website shown here, find the item on the menu bar at the upper left named Free Self-Guided Walking Tours, and then scroll down to find the map with instructions. Zoom in by street. When you find a captain's house you're interested in, click on it and details appear on the right, along with a link to the YouTube episode from this channel that provides the biography of the captain that lived there. You can also read about his sailing adventures while living in that particular house by going to the website menu item, Sailing Adventures, and looking up his name. It's free, fun, and available any time you're out walking. Just bring along your phone. I'm Simon Stanhope, narrator for these episodes. Join us again soon for the next chapter of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains.